live in the future. I tape things on walls. There's a book on my wall and another book on my wall. I don't need this chair. Video essay. Part 1 class. Half a decade ago, on May 6th, 2019, a woman attended the Met Gala. The host, Lady Gaga. The theme, camp, specifically in honor of Susan Sontag's notes on camp. Sontag's final and 58th note, the sort of divine description of it, states that the ultimate camp statement is, "It is good because it is awful," a sentiment many, mostly white guests missed with perfectly normal dresses and boring-looking suits. These guests got camp wrong, but their stories aren't very interesting because one such guest had the audacity to tweet out, to post on Instagram, that she, in fact, was looking camp right in the eye, causing a bit of a debate on if she did engage in camp after her look debuted on the pink carpet. It was bad. The thing is, she absolutely did camp, and today I'm going to explain why. I read a lot for this. I thought a lot about this. I'm positing, I'm reading, I'm doing a theory. It's gonna be a fun time, okay. Model Karlie Kloss was immediately overshadowed at the Met by dozens of celebrities and guests who showed up in extravagant, over-the-top outfits like Gaga, Billy Porter, Jared Leto, or the understated excellence of, like, even Frank Ocean's performance of a photographer on the pink carpet. Like, all these people did camp well, and then Kloss was here like, bam, I'm looking camp right in the eye. However, in the months following the gala, I kept on coming back to Kloss, wondering about just this audacity of this tweet. Was she really looking camp in the eye? And if so, how? I know I already said that I was going to convince you that she was, but this is storytelling. This is 2019. This question haunted me during my undergrad, and I pursued a gender studies degree to hopefully learn the answer. But all that gave me was just like this piece of paper that I'm going to tape on the wall. I know I was just talking shit about my degree, but like in reality, it looks really nice on my wall. And also I gained a lot of skills. Like I can read philosophy now, and I had access to university libraries, and I learned a lot, and I learned how to learn more. And right. So anyways, I got this degree. I worked towards it. I read up on camp. I read up on how one camps in Sontag's framework. I read Sontag, of course. I read how people camp beyond Sontag's framework. And like now, finally, I've looked camp right in the eye. Spoiler alert, it's God. So what is camp? I mean, the simple, unhelpful answer is that it is perpetually subversive and elusive. But Sontag describes it as a curated performance of aesthetic that has missed the mark in some way. It is style, genre, aesthetic for the sake of such, without much care for the actual substance of the thing. And thus, camp is a recreation, a reperformed, misidentified essence of the truth, the thing itself. But if you can identify its fakeness, its performance, you can tell that it's trying too hard. Like, camp is the art of trying hard and then making it wonderfully, spectacularly terrible. It is the artificial extreme in its artificiality, trying desperately to convince you that it's being real and authentic. And I love it. Everybody loves it. Sontag claims there are two ways to achieve this camp: deliberately or accidentally. She calls the accidental naive camp or pure camp and sees it as better than the deliberate, saying as such. But she also seems pretty focused on the actual substance of camp and its performance, the theory, the like removed from the person, removed from the act into like the pure, like divine, it's just theory. So, she glosses a little bit over the style, over the practical use of camp. And in doing so, Sontag doesn't really speak of the history of drag in New York and DC and the start of the ballroom culture and the sharpening of the performance of camp, the leaders of camp ideology and practice, but that's for later. We're still looking at theory. We're still looking at Kloss. We're still looking for camp. And if nothing else, I believe this image, the post itself, is camp. Outside the iconic caption, the image itself shows Kloss looking through a mirror at an aesthetic copy of herself. Mirrors don't really mirror much of anything outside of our general appearances. No souls, no thoughts, no life. But the reflection does offer up a pretty good depiction of a woman's eye, and thus, a woman. But we know a woman is more than her eye, more than her appearance, more than her performance of womanhood, because outside of gender, there is a soul of that person, the thoughts, the life, the complete being. This is why we see drag queens as temporarily acting as a character who is a woman, and also why most sane people view drag as fun and subversive rather than offensive. Because we recognize its artificiality. Because in artificiality, we are both invited to have fun in this queen's gendered performance and recognize the absurdity in our own gendered performance. If Klaas's post and appearance was completely out of naivety, then great. Pure camp has been achieved in Sontag's framework. Klaas was confident in her performance, and the audience saw right through it and began to better understand that which makes up the actions of camp. The performance, even if that action was deliberate, the performance, the execution of cluelessness and confidence were convincing enough for us to interpret it as a mistake, as naive. Klaas's performance has put us into this paradox of camp where she either made this naive mistake she publicly performed on her social media, or she knowingly performed a public mistake in this grandiose self-assurance, acting as someone who does not understand camp as a way to make fun of non-camping Met Gala guests. This network of possibilities, this Schrodinger's cat, becomes Klaas's post, and truth begins to dissolve into performances, one leaning on top of another and another, until the meaning of the thing is deferred. And we've got Derrida's world where God has been murdered, and meaning, oh boy, meaning. Oh.
I was looking camp straight in the eye, and I still rightfully get trolled. I'll accept it. Honestly, I deserve that one.
Klaas made the mistake. It would have been nothing but a mistake if not for the tweet, which elevated the act of mistaking to this position of pure camp. If camp is anything, it is confidence in an unnatural performance. To quote Charles Bush in a roundtable discussion from the New York Times, an element of camp is what the truth is and what the perception is, and when they're two different things. That's where often the humor comes in. Camp is built on a trick, a joke, a lie, in which we recognize the failures and the aesthetics which hold the actual thing back from the truth, the essence of a thing, but which we choose to believe in anyways, mostly because it's fun. To camp is to hold the performance and the truth visibly in tension. Camp dances between and negates the dialectic in both the aesthetics or the appearance of the thing and the political or the actual substance of the thing, as explored in Albert Camus' Create Dangerously. Camp is an aesthetic of aesthetics, not interested in rationality, but in queering, messying, morphing across all axes of understanding. While so many philosophers of art and knowledge want to seem serious and important, camp just wants to dance. For an example of this concept that I just explained, look at this Snapchat from a friend of mine. In it, we see an aluminum container of chips or fries covered in white sauce and shredded cheddar cheese. I think this is gravy. It would be difficult to create a political reading of this image, and it's not very aesthetically interesting. Until you add the caption back in. Believe it or not, these fries changed my life. This caption immediately asks us to reevaluate the artwork and our connection to it by creating both a relationship and attention to the artist and the viewer. The first clause, believe it or not, invites the viewer into this claim the artwork is making. And thus, the second clause, these fries changed my life, exists as the author's primary argument. For something to change someone's life, we expect it to be monumentous, important in some way, but the object that is playing the most important role, the subject of the sentence, the subject which has changed this person's life, is the fries. The author, the performer, thus asks us to believe or disagree in the truth of these fries' ability to change her life. And in doing so, it asks us to consider the possibility of the fries' ability to carry out such a performance. Believing in the fries or not isn't going to change anything in the real world on its own. But the work as a whole made me smile. It allowed me to consider that maybe I was wrong. Maybe these fries did take the position of truth and God after a drunk night out. Maybe these fries could save the world. At any rate, I smiled at this performance of my friend elevating their fries, and my performance of elevating the Snapchat into art and meaning and camp. through my analysis. For another more practical example, take one of my favorite camp films, the Academy Award-winning Black Swan. I remember seeing an ad for this movie every week at the video rental store my dad would take me and my sister to. Natalie Portman looking very serious on the speckled blue counter while my dad paid for whatever Scooby-Doo and Barbie movies my sister and I wanted. When I watched the film later in life, like 1 or 2 years ago, all the actors were so serious and invested in the story. It was so excellent. But not because the story was excellent. Well, it was, but it was kind of ridiculous. Spoilers for this old movie. Sorry if you're over 30 and you get scared by that. In Black Swan, you've got Natalie Portman's character, who's Nina, who can like effortlessly embody the pure, perfect performance of the White Swan in Tchaikovsky's ballet Swan Lake, but then has trouble performing the Black Swan. To achieve artistic excellence, Nina then goes on to lose her mind, do some drugs, have some lesbian sex, and expertly perform the role of the Black Swan before dying at the end of her performance. And the movie ends. At the point of its conception, Black Swan was very well received, with over $300 million grossed in the box office, and 5 Oscar nominations, including a win for Natalie Portman in the Best Lead Actress category. Its themes and story fit in nicely with a culture that was pretty intrigued with the story of the tortured artist. Bon Iver was still riding off the success of For Emma Forever Ago, and the alt-righty, formerly known as Kanye West, released a project exploring his own tortured artist self. But as time passed, as more creatives pushed back on this notion of the tortured artist, as commercial depictions of queer people continued to evolve, the mark which Black Swan absolutely hit on its release moved to a new position, and the film opened up to the possibility of camp. As Sontag writes in Note 30, the canon of camp can change. Time has a great deal to do with it. Time may enhance what seems simply dogged or lacking in fantasy now because we are too close to it, because it resembles too closely our own everyday fantasies, the fantastic nature of what we do not perceive. This film is fantastic now. It was fantastic then, but it's fantastic in a different way now. It's fantasy. Even if ours is not a perfect world, progressing acceptance of marginalized identities has led to this culture of possibility and will continue to lead to more culture of possibility. As a culture, we have higher standards of representation, which is usually an all right thing. And we often criticize harmful stereotypes whenever we see them, both in the past and present. But then you have those pure camp works, which seem to straddle the line between political art and aesthetic art so perfectly that it falls short of both merits of art and becomes a failure in our aesthetic/broad value discourses and a success in something else entirely. That is why, even though you can pick out politically incorrect details in the works of Black Swan or But I'm a Cheerleader, no one cares, because those artworks subvert our expectations of being in service to an aesthetic of political truths. They are beyond aesthetics. They are beyond politics. They are divine. They are camp. In a perspective of camp, the movies hop between both perspectives of aesthetic and political, and in its negation, they are in service of neither. As explored in Note 58, to be camp is to be awful, and to be awful in the realm of camp is to be art which is fun and confusing and radical, and often for a specific marginalized audience. Camp at its best, whether it is in reference to Karlie Kloss's Dress or a past critically panned movie, is a reverence for the dismissed, a celebration of our humility, and a striving for aesthetics outside of the structure of power and hierarchy, which is why I love it. Camp is God saying there's another way. Part 2, Kiki. Although Sontag was able to advocate for the acceptance of camp aesthetics within academic circles, camp was never designed to be understood by academia or a wider culture. While I'm sure the Harlem Queens in the 1920s would be proud of the civil progress Black and brown and queer and gender variant people have made over the past 100 years, that we as a culture have a prominently known queen of drag. Let me put her up. There's the queen. Okay. Drag in its language follows a history of Black art being appropriated to better fit white ideals and tastes. But at the time of writing, even in its most sanitized state, the fear of the queen is, we have anti-trans bills and anti-drag bills. Cross-dressing, specifically men dressing up as women, has been in vogue forever. Think Greek and Shakespearean theater to start, with women banned from performing. This history of cross-dressed performances in the play meanders to, as scholar and Queen Lady J has identified as the beginning of the modern practice, Victorian duo Bolton and Park dressing in gowns that dragged across the floor, a theory to drag's etymology. Between the Greeks and Victorian era, drag changed from a necessary act for catharsis in plays to a fun little thing that brought entertainment to the masses. That is, until the marginalized started elevating the performance. After being barred from white drag culture in the second half of the 19th century, black and brown performers started holding their own galas in Harlem. There's a little conflict as to if Black American ball culture began in Harlem, since the first queen of drag, William Dorsey Swann, began holding balls in DC in 1882, but drag culture became rooted in Harlem as it grew into a hub for Black art during the 19th century. Harlem's drag scene continued to follow the same pageantry performances as the white scenes, but slowly began to develop a more unique, stronger culture, especially with the rise of house and ballroom cultures, when performers began competing under different houses. Houses would be led by a mother who would offer mentorship to other performers, and those houses often acted as teams when they performed at balls, which were kind of like meets. Through the community and development of primarily black and brown ball culture, drag has become an umbrella term for numerous categories drag performers work to master, one such being voguing, for example. The act of voguing came up sometime between the 1960s and 1980s, either from house ballroom pioneer Paris Dupree, I think that's him there, or the godfather of voguing, Willie Ninja, who described voguing as throwing shade in the film Paris is Burning. And yes, according to scholar, artist, activist, busy and talented person Michael Robertson, even though the dance style was originally called pop, dip, and spin, even though it began as an offshoot of breakdancing, the term vogue is in reference to the poses and framing of the fashion magazine. But yeah, voguing was a way to throw shade, as was reading, or the act of acknowledging one's performance as artificial and insulting that performance, that camp aestheticism, in a pretty quick and complete way. RuPaul, the aforementioned current queen of drag, and his extremely popular show continued to follow the traditions of house balls with their different categories for competitions and display them for a national public. Now, I don't think this is a bad thing. It wouldn't matter if I did either way, but through this sharing of historically black, brown, and queer art form, its vocabulary, some of which has its roots in AAVE, including terms like shade, reading, fierce, gag, serve, realness, tea, and kiki, have found themselves in the vocabulary of young people online who are often white and are often completely removed from ball culture and in the mouths of white folks, including myself. Like any form of art, especially from racialized artistic traditions, drag was, is, and will ever be in danger of losing its punk radical edge, with some arguing that it already has. From Sontag and Butler's philosophizing over the aesthetics of camp and the postmodern ethos of drag, to Jenny Livingston removing drag performances from their context as an act of ethnography and entertainment for social and financial capital in Paris's Burning, to finally RuPaul developing a reality TV show centered around a variety of performers, focusing on a variety of challenges and themes, stretching the performance of a single night into a month of filming and eliminations. Even when we produce great work in reference to any marginalized artwork, we are in turn always making it a little less disruptive. But gosh, especially with this idea of drag and the physical, tangible performance of gender, camp and the ballroom have so much to offer us in terms of how we present ourselves to the world, how we create and serve realness, how we can and should move forward with an understanding that everything that is not nature, everything that God did not create, is in fact at least a little bit camp. Like, have you been to a cathedral lately? About a year ago, I went to a mass at a cathedral that I didn't usually attend back in my college town. It had all the usual cathedral dress. Tall stone columns, stained glass, lots of candles, Jesus on a crucifix, cast in bronze, frankincense burning from who knows where, and a man in these wonderfully ornate white robes with a green stole presenting as priest. People whispered hellos before we all watched the priest perform a service, interacting with him and performing our roles as audience when right and necessary. But the thing I remember most from this service, the thing that made it notable, was the priest's story after the gospel, his homily. On that particular weekend, the priest told us about some missionary work on the imperial perimeter, the global south, if you will, where missionaries needed more money in order to spread the message and gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, this is normal. This is what churches will do sometimes, especially in rhubarb country. Ask for money for the missionaries who will then provide resources and avenues for Christian conversion in countries that continue to be colonized. But this was the first time I was hearing this message in a cathedral with its bronze Jesus and high ceilings and ornate statues and artworks all lining the walls of this massive worship space. I wondered how much it cost to heat or to cool, and if $20 to the missionary could really be the answer to Jesus' message of radical love, forgiveness, and inclusion. Could my $20 be better spent somewhere else? All in all, definitely not my favorite Kiki. There I go again, using racialized house ball slang to do a brief close reading of a moment in my white experience. And it's so, strange for me to speak on this, difficult for me to speak on this, because I have so little authority over this language and culture, and I'm advocating for it kind of, but not really, and ultimately I'm just trying to write a silly little video that I've given the name essay in order to give it some unearned weight and seriousness and ultimately merit. I'm too far in to change anything, though. Not that, anything could be changed from here. So I guess I'll just have to serve honesty in regards to what camp means for me, which isn't very camp at me, is it? I believe there's something wonderful about the possibilities drag and ball culture and the essence of camp have, especially in reference to their histories and the initial drive for subversion and possibilities in the ways we all move through the world. And I think with that, I should probably, explain the real reason why I named this section Kiki. Which means I gotta tape something up on the wall again. Kiki's Delivery Service is a movie from the absolute genius Hayao Miyazaki based on a book by Iko Kadono about a young witch named Kiki who moves away from home in order to get a job in the big city. It is a movie that particularly resonated with me when I moved away from home in order to get a job at the small city. Anyways, Kiki wants to move to the city and second guesses her decision until she stumbles upon a bakery and a woman named Osano, expecting a child of her own, offers Kiki a room for occasional help in the bakery. Kiki decides to set up a delivery service to share her witching services and begins to connect a whole lot more with the city while also learning to perform the duties of witch with more and more confidence up until she realizes the intricacies of the relationships already developed in the cities without her being there. Before her arrival, when her friend Tombo appears to be friends with the disrespectful and unlikable granddaughter of one of Kiki's clients. This is not great for Kiki, and she immediately becomes depressed and loses her witching abilities, including flying and being able to speak with her cat Gigi. After failing this performance of witching, she takes a step back, visits a friend, returns to the city, and regains her power of flight when it actually matters. When she isn't performing this artificial act of work of delivering packages, but being a hero and saving Tombo from an air balloon accident. She isn't trying to be a hero or a witch or anything at all. She is trying to do something. She is trying to save her friend. And spoiler alert, she succeeds. The act of being a witch is pretty abstract and not super tangible in the film. Kiki thinks about what skill she ought to pursue, that kind of witch she ought to be, but she primarily discovers the essence of being through the act of doing. As an audience, we are to believe Kiki's special skill is probably something like flying or just untangible at all. But then she loses the skill of flying, when in reality her special skill, that thing she does which makes her a witch, is helping people. And when she engages in this performance of helping others, she feels both more like a witch and more like herself. This is why drag and gender scholars like Butler emphasize the doing, the acting of specific practices in order to be a part of a certain identity. Just as a firefighter is the person who dresses in particular clothes and performs a specific task, the fighting of fires, and the woman dresses in clothes that then become women's clothes and is judged under patriarchy based on the quality and rigidity of her actions, the acts of any of our doings influence the perception and reality of our beings. The artificial is not only relegated to drag in the margins. In the eye of camp, we are all performing. Part 3, if you're following the lore, once I got my job, my first grown-up job, I found myself floundering, trying to present and perform myself as not just a worker, but a good worker. On the one hand, I believe my work, the things I do, are important. But on the other, my place of work is a bureaucracy, and part of my job is to work within and throughout the bureaucracy to get absolutely anything done, which means I collaborate with a lot of people in very different ways, sometimes only for a couple minutes here and there. Whenever I meet or contact someone new, I make sure I'm dressed properly and speak with additional authority that I intentionally quiet for when I speak with customers and non-employees. In one moment, I must perform respectability with reference to my age and limited experience to other employees, and in the next, I must perform comfortability with reference to my gender to customers and non-employees. Even if the comfortability feels more natural in my day-to-day life, as a worker, I do actively try to dress and perform the part so I may be good at my job, to try and understand all of the things I should do in order to become a good worker. To quote RuPaul, we're all born naked and the rest is drag, and I am definitely trying to serve good worker. The rest is that performance which strives to the truth of the thing, but that performance always falls short. When the performance falls short, pulls back the curtain, becomes in any way unnatural or artificial, the performance confirms the existence of itself, and in doing so, the additional existence of a script. Sometimes, like with masculine gender performance, there are options in which scripts we are allowed to follow. The professional bodybuilder, the clean-shaven yuppie, and the blue-collared mechanic in his Dickies all perform these acceptable scripts of masculinity with ease. The men engaging with them don't even notice that there's a script most days. But if you take a new job, or if you fully recognize you are enacting a script, you can't exactly throw away all your conceptions of society without ostracizing yourself from it. There's a reason drag and burlesque shows have stayed relatively insular for much of history. We know it is not manly to go out and perform variety shows with the alter ego of a woman, and we know it is not ladylike to be overtly sexual in public spaces, even if they're in a bar or whatever, even if it's a performance. We know that there are both good and bad reasons for someone to follow a script, but sometimes the script still doesn't have our best interests. Often when movements centered around marginalized people succeed in one way, push for more systemic room in a script, it will constrict in another more insidious way. Naomi Wolf explores this theory in her book The Beauty Myth, studying how these constraints on one identity also often seep their way into a dialectic in the other identity. If it is unwomanly to be large, then it is unmanly to be small. If it is unmanly to enjoy the intricate romances and melodramas of the likes of like Stella Dallas, then it is also a sign of frivolousness and inferiority when anyone, especially women, do enjoy those things. Even when films like Avengers Endgame are the much more melodramatic, but I guess there's explosions and stuff in it, so it's cool. The strict executions of the script limit our personal human experience, so we must learn ways to love, enjoy, perform, be, and in turn wisely break the rules of the script in response. We must camp. When one thing becomes gendered, it becomes a part of a dialectic and tightens the script for everyone, because under our current economic and social systems, labels are used to organize, manage, and maintain different groups as solid and consistent, partially to sell people stuff. If everyone likes the same thing, then they become easier to market to, sell to, and control. When drag exists as the performance of possibility and artifice, it sheds light on our own individuality and autonomy, and thus how we could and ought to act outside of identity, expectations, and market values. Drag offers us an example of what breaking the rules of the script looks like. When we embrace a philosophy of drag and the campness of the worker becomes a brief performance that exists as an important part of our lives, but we are also able to easily end the performance when we've put in our time. A queen is not necessarily always a queen, and a worker does not necessarily always have to be a worker. But in order to end this performance, you have to recognize it's happening. When I took my position, I signed an offer. Then I signed a contract which outlined all of my professional responsibilities. The closest, tangible, knowable manifestation to a script I've ever seen. In my role as professional administrator for a bureaucratic institution, I often have two bosses. My actual boss, who is listed in the script and very supportive of me and my work, and the bureaucracy itself, who acts as everyone's second boss and passes out restrictions in the form of policies, budgets, and so on. In the performance of my work, my boss is still an actor, but the bureaucracy is the director. Especially when we don't notice, the company itself limits the breadth of our performances and how we engage with one another as people. The bureaucracy expects us to naturally move and exist as workers. With friends, though, with accomplices, with direct coworkers, we often see the faces, know their voices, and thus perceive these people as humans who are at the moment also performing worker. But as a singular person who is outward facing by the company's standards, who often only interacts with others outside of my department when there's a complaint, sometimes performing worker is the only way to both get what I need and keep my sanity. Either I give myself up fully and entirely to the institution as a worker, work more and more every day for some sort of professional value incentive, or I conduct a performance art piece for 40 hours a week and to leave the performance on the stage at the workplace and just be myself after that. I already know how to be a good worker because I already do good and impassioned work. So when I perform my silly little job functions, I usually perform them as art when I have the opportunities and capacity to do so. Let me explain myself because this is not a new practice. In 1969, Mierle, Laderman, ukeles wrote the 3.5-page Manifesto for Maintenance Art, 1969, and proposed that the reproductive work of maintenance, washing the dishes, doing laundry, sweeping hallways, collecting trash in the city, easily had the capacity to be art if we treated it as such. That such a work can be a performance, which then reflects some value of a society, as many great works of art do. To quote the manifesto, everything I say is art is art. Everything I do is art is art. Ukeles began creating pieces with this interest in maintenance work, but it wasn't until 1976 that she created, in my opinion, her best work for the Whitney exhibition Art Greater Than Less Than World, I Make Maintenance Art for 1 hour every day. I Make Maintenance Art was a collaboration between 300 maintenance workers where she would photograph and interview them, asking if the workers were doing work or art. She would then ask them to choose and spend 1 hour of every day doing art during their jobs. And effectively, as Jillian Steinhauer notes in their article for Hyperallergic, expanded the manifesto from everything I say is art to everything you say is art. Everything you do is art. Thus, the only thing required for a performance is for you to recognize it as such. And as someone who has engaged in custodial maintenance work, as someone who has held positions where my job is to This is a quote, to look busy for the duration of my work shift in order to appease some bureaucracy. The act of performing, the act of doing art is the thing that effectively saves myself, my soul, from being equated to an unrecognized, unacknowledged performance. After I make maintenance art for 1 hour every day, Ukeles wrote to the New York City Department of Sanitation and took on the position of the department's first ever artist in residence. The position was never paid, and yet, through the action of making art with a very specific purpose and goal, she became recognized by the state and public as artist. Her work in this position, including 1979's Touch Sanitation performance, where she thanked and shook the hands of every single sanitation worker in New York City, is recognized as art because Ukeles asks us to view it as such. And we have decided to believe in her position, her performance, as an artist. In her manifesto, Ukeles states, "I am an artist. I am a woman. I'm a wife. I'm a mother." Random order. In the eye of camp, our actions, our identities, and our souls are more than they appear because the eye recognizes the artifice which composes our identities and thus also highlights the true self which cannot be performed. Camp shows us what can be stripped away by performing it to us in a reflection. And when we look camp straight in the eye, or right in the eye, we see this reflection. We see the real. We see God. The thing is, even as I argue that work is a performance we should actively recognize, and that performance of work should be art because it allows for a little more separation between the self as employee and the self as self, we do need work to, live and function in this society. This is a cope. We will still partake in these cultural performances and narratives, and for all intents and purposes, we will act them out as truth. When I was a custodian, my boss didn't care if I was making art or not, just as long as the floors and the windows were cleaned. Nobody cares if Kiki's working to strengthen her artistic craft of witching as long as she completes her witchly duties. The only reason people cared about this Karlie Kloss tweet is because we thought we recognized it as a failure. But in this act of failing, she showed us the truth in her naivety and imperfection. She showed us her humility. Even as my being may start within a performance, when I take effort to exit the stages of work or citizen or hegemonic gender or artist, I am allowed to the opportunity to explore who I am outside of the performance of what I do and discover the substance of being outside the position of appearing a la performing. I get to be me. I get to find me. And even after that separation, there are some things that tend to stick. That's me. That turn out to not be a part of the artificialness of camp. I've looked camp in the eye, and I see myself. I am an artist. I am a man. I am a learner. I am a friend. Random order. That was supposed to be the end of the video, but I realized I could go a little bit more explicit in the, absence of camp is God stuff. But I didn't really want to rewrite any of this. I think I already mentioned that earlier because it's for the bit. I want this out on May 6th. I want this out on the 5-year anniversary of the Kloss tweet of the 2019 Met Gala. So this video isn't as polished as I'd like it to be, but that's okay. I'm still, I don't really make these things to be polished and perfect. Imagine making a perfect work of art about the 2019 Met Gala and Karlie Kloss's performance of camp. That feels like there are already better things to do with my time. But let's talk about God. In the book of Exodus, Moses asks God for their name, and they reply with this unknowable sort of word. YHWH, or Yahweh, which has been translated in the Christian Bible as I am that I am, and then in Hebrew scripture as he brings into existence whatever exists. In CJ the X's Stranger Things video, they identify this I am that I am sentiment as the present, a thing which is always fleeting and changing and difficult to pin down, difficult to define almost. A moment composed of absolutely everything in existence and only one singular thing all at once. Everything that composes a moment is also only the moment. It's like a little, expanded version of the Trinity. That moment, that present, is you and me, just without the requirement of doing. It is being without doing. That's what I think God is, right? It's the truth. The moment, when you're fully present in the moment, there's this erasure of separation where you're not thinking about like you, but you are like experiencing everything within yourself. Like that's pretty divine. Your body, you're taking in all of your senses, everything you know and don't know. It doesn't matter. You're just experiencing. It's pure experience, pure presence. I feel like I'm just saying words to describe a moment. To describe a moment is like trying to describe camp. There is value in finding the complexity of the moment of the art and then like trying to make it simpler and understandable and shareable so then we can all be more present and more in tune with the divine. Like that's cool shit. God may exist beyond time itself, right? But they are present, they exist, they perform, they are in the moment right now. Right here. Right there, wherever you are. This is where we find divinity, beyond performance, beyond spectacle, beyond the actions which respond to past identity performances. It is there. It's there. It's there again. It's this is why Benjamin hates film, because we're distracting from the now, from the tangible present, from the being and existing in the moment. A good artist is creating art which then exists in conversation with a community. It is designed, it is community driven, right? If you're making an album about heartbreak, sorry, I've been listening to a lot of Bon Iver. If you're making an album about heartbreak, you want it to find the people with broken hearts so you can wallow and heal and carry on together. It is here in this moment of being, in this moment of feeling, in this moment of community and identity and just existing where we find divinity within ourselves. It is beyond performance. It is beyond spectacle. It is beyond the actions which respond to past identifying performances, right? We said that. It is beyond doing into the essence.